It was the summer of 1914. Europe was on fire. Austria-Hungary had declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilized. Germany invaded Belgium. Britain entered the fight. Within weeks, the world's greatest powers were locked in a brutal industrial war, unlike anything ever seen before. And yet, across the Atlantic, one nation stood apart. The United States of America, under President Woodrow Wilson, chose neutrality. The United States must be neutral in fact as well as in name, Wilson said. We must be impartial in thought as well as action. But neutrality was never simple. America was not isolated, not economically, not emotionally, and certainly not politically. Millions of Americans had roots in Europe, Irish, German, Italian, British. Families were divided, opinions clashed. While Wilson urged peace, American businesses kept feeding the war machine, selling weapons, food, and supplies to Britain and France. Meanwhile, Germany watched closely and waited. In early 1915, Germany made a bold move. With its surface fleet outmatched by Britain's Royal Navy, Germany turned to a new weapon, the submarine. In February 1915, Germany declared unrestricted submarine warfare. Any Allied ship in the war zone would be sunk without warning. Then came May 7th, 1915, the day the world changed forever. The RMS Lusitania, one of the fastest and most luxurious ocean liners of the age, was sailing from New York to Liverpool. Off the coast of Ireland, a single torpedo from a German U-boat struck her hull. In just 18 minutes, she sank, taking over 1,198 lives with her, among them 128 Americans. The world was stunned. America was furious. President Wilson demanded an apology. Germany offered regrets but refused to stop attacking ships. Tensions flared again in March 1916 when the French ferry Sussex was torpedoed, injuring several Americans. Wilson issued an ultimatum: stop unrestricted submarine warfare or face consequences. For now, Germany backed down, but this fragile peace wouldn't last. January 1917. As the war dragged into its third year, Germany made a desperate gamble. Their navy believed that if they resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, they could starve Britain into surrender within 6 months before the US could react. But there was a problem. If the US entered the war, Germany would face a powerful new enemy. So they hatched a secret plan, one that would shock the world. German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann sent a coded telegram to the Mexican government. In exchange for an alliance against the US, Germany promised to help Mexico reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The message was intercepted by British intelligence and eventually passed to the American government. When the contents of the Zimmermann telegram were revealed to the public in March 1917, outrage exploded. Newspapers screamed headlines like, "Germany invites Mexico to invade the US." Americans, who had once supported neutrality, began to change their minds. The final wall between peace and war was beginning to crack. Even before the Zimmermann telegram, America's economy was deeply tied to the Allies. Banks in New York loaned billions to Britain and France. Factories boomed as they produced rifles, artillery shells, and uniforms for European armies. American exports to Britain increased by over 300% during the war. To many, staying out of the war while profiting from it seemed hypocritical. At the same time, powerful propaganda campaigns began shaping how Americans saw the conflict. Posters showed heroic soldiers defending freedom. Others painted Germans as brutal Huns, destroying innocent lives. President Wilson framed the war not just as a military struggle, but as a moral crusade. He spoke of making the world safe for democracy, of ending tyranny, of building a better future. Slowly, public opinion shifted. The idea of America standing aside while the world burned no longer felt right. On the 2nd of April 1917, President Wilson stood before Congress. His voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of history. The world must be made safe for democracy. 2 days later, on the 4th of April, the Senate voted. The House followed on the 6th of April. By overwhelming majorities, America declared war on Germany. The Great War was no longer just European. It was global. And with the arrival of fresh American troops and resources, the balance of power began to shift. By 1918, millions of American soldiers known as doughboys were fighting in France. They would play a decisive role in turning the tide of the war. While much of the world focused on battles overseas, the war was also being fought in secret right here in America. German agents were active across the country, carrying out covert operations to disrupt US support for Britain and France. In 1916, Black Tom Island, a major ammunition depot in New York Harbor, exploded in one of the largest acts of sabotage in American history. Windows shattered miles away. The Statue of Liberty was damaged. Investigations later revealed that German spies had planted bombs. Then came the Kingsland explosion in 1917, another factory hit by sabotage. These attacks shocked the public. They weren't just distant battles, the war was now on American soil. And many began to wonder, could neutrality truly protect them? America in 1917 was a nation of immigrants. Millions of Americans traced their roots to Germany, Ireland, Italy, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and beyond. And when war broke out, these communities found themselves torn. German Americans feared persecution. Irish Americans resented British rule and were reluctant to support Britain. Jewish Americans feared rising anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, pro-war voices accused immigrant neighborhoods of disloyalty. President Wilson faced pressure from both sides to remain neutral and to stand firm against tyranny. But as tensions rose, so did suspicion. Accents were mocked. Newspapers printed headlines like "Speak English or be silent." For many, the question wasn't just about war, it was about identity. Who gets to be American? And what does loyalty mean in time of war? When America declared war, the battlefield may have been far away, but the war touched every corner of American life. Overnight, the government launched massive campaigns to mobilize the population. Women rolled up their sleeves and took jobs in factories once held by men. Children collected scrap metal and planted victory gardens to grow food for soldiers. Schools taught lessons on patriotism. Churches held special services for peace and protection. Posters urged citizens to buy war bonds. Even Hollywood got involved, producing films to rally support. The war effort became a national movement, and every American was expected to play a role. But behind the patriotic posters and parades, questions lingered. Was this unity real, or was it enforced? With millions needed for the war, Congress passed the Selective Service Act in May 1917. Over 24 million men registered for the draft, but not everyone agreed. Many young men resisted, some out of conscience, others out of fear. Thousands fled to Canada. Others burned their draft cards, risking imprisonment. At the same time, the government cracked down hard. The Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 made it illegal to criticize the war effort. Journalists were jailed. Activists were arrested. Even criticizing the president could land you in prison. Eugene V. Debs, a socialist presidential candidate, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for speaking out against the war. Freedom of speech, once seen as untouchable, suddenly felt fragile. As America entered the war, it also entered a battle over its own soul. In 1917, film was still a young art, but already a powerful one. President Wilson knew the power of images, and he used it. He created the Committee on Public Information, better known as the CPI, to shape public opinion through media. The CPI worked with newspapers, radio, and especially the film industry. Movie stars like Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford appeared in propaganda reels urging people to support the war. Films like Pershing's Crusaders and The Kaiser, The Beast of Berlin, painted Germans as monstrous villains. Even cartoons got in on the action. Bugs Bunny wouldn't come for decades, but his predecessors were already fighting the Hun. Through music, film, and mass media, the message was clear. This was not just a war for territory, it was a war for justice. And every citizen had a role to play. America's entry into WW1 was not sudden. It was the result of years of pressure, events, and choices. From the sinking of the Lusitania to the Zimmermann telegram to economic ties and shifting ideals, each played a part. But one thing was clear. When America joined the war, everything changed. Not just for the battlefield, but for the future of American foreign policy. For the first time, the US stepped onto the world stage as a global power, and it would never go back to being just a bystander. This was the moment the modern era began.